final question on this, I guess, is supplementation. So I don't know if I think Eric, I don't know if you change any supplementation in terms of some things that kind of come out to my mind. Diuretics come in. I guess as a natural, there's not many that we have to play with, but there are some that people try and use. Creatine is always one that comes up, so I think it's worthwhile just mentioning it. And then like caffeine intake, that can obviously play a role somewhat with like diet, like being somewhat of a diuretic and things. Are you manipulating any of these?
I think so. There's one thing I used to do that now I don't. I used to be like, hey, creatine increases the water content inside the muscle, so let's take it like morning of. But I think if we accept that carbohydrates do draw water into the muscle, but they can overdo it, then why don't we accept that with creatine? And do we need to be taking creatine like on game day if we know from data that it takes like 3 to 4 weeks before it actually falls below super physiologic, well, I should say habitual levels in standard people? So I will actually suggest that they don't take creatine in the last couple of days, which is something different, just because it shouldn't matter. Like, you should be maintaining supplemental levels for weeks, not just days. And I have actually seen that some people, in response to taking creatine acutely, do look a little worse for a little bit. So, I mean, it's not a huge thing. It's not something major. It's 5 grams, it's not like the 5 grams of carbohydrate intake, there's only so much water that can be carried with it. But that's something where I've just had people like, don't worry about that on game day. There are a few other like osmolytic compounds that I would probably not have someone take. Like if they were doing like betaine, I probably wouldn't have them do that within a few weeks of competing, as that's coming out with a little more data around it. So there's a couple, but for the most part, it's more like just don't take this, and then let's keep your caffeine at a reasonable level, like whatever I consider baseline is. And yeah, I think as a general rule, anything, I think this is philosophically something that people need to understand. Like, the goal is not to dry out, like, especially if someone comes from like an NPC background, if they've been in the sport a long time before working with me, they kind of like, if you get feedback from a judge at an NPC show or at a more traditional judging panel, they will use the words dry and lean, well peaked, and shredded all like in the same thing. Like, oh, he was so dry. Like, I've even found myself saying that just because I know what other people will hear me mean when I say that. Like, I try to be like, oh, he was crisp and shredded, because that's actually what I mean. But they'll be like, yeah, he was dry as hell. And I'm like, well, he actually was not dry. Like, what does that even necessarily mean in this context? And that is a look that is sometimes rewarded by certain judges, where they actually do look dry. And I think that's just kind of that thing where if enough people keep doing something like dehydration related practices, then that becomes a look that's associated with leanness, because it's a look associated with everything. So anyway, I think generally the goal is not to dehydrate. It's not to drop body water. We don't necessarily want, in fact, we don't want a lot of water in the subcutaneous space, more than normal, but there will be whatever is there. And so long as it's not abnormally high, that's an okay amount, right? It should still be, it will have to be proportionate. We can't really change the ratios of those compartments much. So in general, any strategy or supplement that is based on the idea that being more dehydrated is better or being drier is better is something that I would not recommend. And I think, like, sometimes you'll get like, well, what about this diuretic, or what about Epsom salts, or what about this? And I kind of go like, okay, let's go back to what I said. Anything that is for that specific purpose as a baseline strategy, unless, like, if you spilled over, I could see some rationale for it as a corrective strategy. But in general, I don't think that that's something that would be that I would include. It doesn't make sense to me logically, and I haven't seen it great benefits for most people.
I have to laugh about the dry comment too, because it does drive me nuts. Like, the holding water, because sometimes like when people aren't lean enough, they just like holding water. And we need to flip it and just like when somebody would be like, man, he looks wet. And so
he looks moist.
Yeah. So anyway, supplement wise, I don't want to overvalue. I'm gonna preface what I'm saying here and like don't overvalue the supplements. Just because I will adjust them doesn't mean like these are like the first thing you focus on. Remember, right? I laid out 4 levels. Supplement was like at the bottom. But I have had some increases in the supplements I use over the years, just as I've seen things make a difference. It's funny that Eric, you mentioned the creatine issue. Like Pete, I think you remember even like from like way back in the day when I was doing the rapid backloads, like I still kind of do it where I increase creatine a little bit like a week out, and then I taper it off to nothing in the last few days, for the exact same reasons that Eric said. I do think that some people, even some people still get some GI distress from the creatine monohydrate. So it's like you can load up creatine, maximize what you have, and then the last few days just taper it off. So I've done that same thing. Glucose disposal agents, I will also utilize because, everyone does have their own load look. And some people, do have this like, transient phase from where carbohydrates are consumed and then stored as muscle glycogen. And, like Eric said, we don't always know exactly what's going on in someone's body, but we, venture an idea, a hypothesis about what is going on here. So, some people, it's possible that some of that glucose will, while waiting to synthesize in the glycogen, hang around in some of the subcutaneous space and maybe draw some water towards it. So if, I have found that sometimes when I load people, and they tend to have a softer load look, like it just takes time for them to, get that crisper look after I load them. I have found like adding like a glucose disposal agent can shorten that time, make them look a little bit crisper, especially for some of my black competitors because, insulin resistance is a little bit more common among black people than white people. So sometimes I found giving them a glucose disposal agent can shorten that time of the load look when they sharpen up a little bit. The diuretic issue is actually something I had to eat my words on probably about 5 years ago because I never used it. And I was like, no, this is, not what we want, for the same reasons that Eric said. Like, we're not trying to like reduce total body water. We're trying to make sure that, you can't play with the ratios too much. You just wanted to like maximize intramuscular water stores. And so, I was like, if we're taking a diuretic, it's kind of defeating our purpose, because, the ratios work in our favor anyway. There's more intramuscular water than subcutaneous anyway. But anyway, one of my clients was like, I feel like I look better. She had done shows before. She's like, I feel like I look better when I take like an herbal diuretic, not like a prescription or anything like that. Like a light herbal diuretic, like a dandelion root or something like that. And I was like, no, we don't want that. And she's like, just try it. Let me take a look. She was, a couple weeks out. And so we ran a quick test and, I'll be damned. She did look better. I was like, well, all right, let's do it. I guess, but what I found with the herbal diuretics, so I will use them sometimes, but, generally I've also found that they are most helpful in those people that are prone to holding water. I think we've seen those clients where they tend to get like a more spilly look with every little small thing that happens. I found they've been useful, but I would say it's a double-edged sword. And if you're thinking about using it for a client, test this one in particular, because I've also seen like, I've almost seen that some people can just look worse from it. Like they can't get a pump as easily, there's definitely probably some reduced blood volume going on and, altering their electrolytes a little bit, not even from anything too drastic, just a, herbal diuretic. So some people will look better. Some people will look worse. Test it. If you're going to try it, don't just throw it in there.
Yeah, I guess.
I just want to say one more.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, about the caffeine. You were saying, I do tend to like try to reduce just a little bit, but like stay close because, stress in the final week can make such a big difference. I don't want somebody, on like 600 milligrams of caffeine a day. So I try to like bring it down to like help them relax a little bit, you know, but I don't want to bring it down so much that they feel like, groggy and pissed off and stuff like that. So it's like just a slight reduction to chill out, but not so much that you can't make it through your days.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess three thoughts then with the caffeine. So caffeine, yeah, I usually try to pull that back some also, especially like the second half of the day, like Friday for a Saturday show. You know, people have a hard time sleeping to begin with the night before the show. And oftentimes if you see like people not sleep well, they can look funky. You know, like they don't load as well. They look a little bit off if their sleep is terrible. And so just from a stress standpoint, just allowing them to sleep a little better. I a lot of times try to just keep caffeine lower, especially the later part of the day before the show, to help sleep as much as possible. And then as far as you mentioned glucose uptake and load look and tightening up, one thing not supplements I oftentimes will do in that situation too is have them do a little bit more movement or pumping, because muscle contraction can help increase glucose uptake. So, you know, if someone's doing a really hard load, like maybe they do an extra 5-10 minute pump, you know, a couple times throughout the day. Or one thing I've definitely noticed, I've had clients who did really, really large loads, who maybe traveled to a show and got there early, like maybe got there Thursday, and Friday they just like stayed in the hotel and they did this really, really large load and they just laid around all day. And oftentimes that looks a lot worse than if they're like moving like they would on a daily basis to help glucose uptake and help move some of those carbs around. And so a lot of times we'll have them get up and move. Like in that situation, it's like, you're not going to just lay in your hotel bed and like stuff your face all day. Like you got to get up and move here. And oftentimes that helps their look as well. And then the third point related back to dry and Eric's comment, this is just a side note. I did a show in 2006. It was the first time I prepped with Lane Norton, and much like Eric, you know, I was at that phase where it's like, here's someone who uses a science-based approach. I'm going to do what I'm told. He had me keep drinking water. So I drank water on show day. I went out and did my class. I ended up taking like second out of 9 in an open class at like 20 years old. And I was much leaner and looked quote unquote drier, you know, because I was leaner than a lot of the other guys. And the promoter actually came back to me after prejudging, because I was the only guy backstage drinking water, because it was 2006. And he comes back to me and he goes, I heard you're drinking water back here. How much water have you had today? And I said, I don't know. I probably had 3/4 of a gallon or something before I got on stage. It's like, well, how do you look so dry? You know, I was like, well, you know, I don't know. That's what I was told to do. You know, I was a 20-year-old kid. I didn't know what I was doing. I just followed direction, you know. But it's funny how much things have changed over the last 14 years now since that. Because you go to shows now, at least drug-tested shows, and I would argue 75-80% of people or more are drinking water backstage at this point at most drug-tested shows.
Man, it is so funny how things have even changed with the water too. That it is. I mean, but it is still more prevalent. But like, I went to a show with a client even like 5 years ago where he was walking in with this gallon of water, and some guy goes, "Hell's up with the water, bro? Did you give up already?" Like, all right. I go, and it was a first-time competitor. I go, ignore that. Just block that out. Just keep going.
I think one thing that we maybe haven't touched on, and thank you for all covering supplementation, was just within the nutritional parameters, was nutrient timing. Obviously, we kind of talked about that on a global scale in terms of where we're maybe kind of loading or starting our load with carbohydrates, and we kind of gone over front, mid, kind of backloading, which kind of we've getting feedback from our refeed days to kind of give us an idea of which of those might be appropriate, along with some other variables. But in terms of like nutrient timing, kind of when we're eating food through the day, how important is that? Is it important for different kind of loading when you are doing it, whether or not it's kind of front, back, or mid. I don't know if, Eric, you want to start off with maybe talk through the front, mid, and kind of backload, or like when carbs are timed, just kind of briefly, and then talk about nutrient timing a little bit in terms of maybe, and if it's different for each of those.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of the Revive Stronger member site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, a growing exercise library, presentations, research reviews, and courses. If you want to get involved, sign up via the description.
Yeah, I think it's useful just to get our terminology on the same page. So backloading has nothing to do with John Kiefer. Just start that. Backloading has been around for a long time before that was a thing. So front loading and backloading are kind of what they sound like. A front load typically is an increase in carbohydrate relative to baseline earlier in the week. And then then a backload, and it probably comes back up as you get close to the show. A backload is basically just that second part, where maybe no later than, say, like no earlier than, say, like Thursday. If the show is on Saturday, are you increasing carbohydrates? It's typically 24 to 48 hours, and that could be looked at as the Friday, Saturday, or maybe the Thursday, Friday beforehand. But it's just a steep increase right before you get on stage. There are mid loads, which are basically the same concept as a front load, where you go in early and then you let it clean up and then you top it off. That's basically the mindset. And a mid load is just basically like a front load adjusted to what the load look of the person is, I think is probably the best way to describe it. Like for example, when I'm not just eating up into a show, or when I tend to look best with a mid load. A front load's too long. Like I clean up and then I backload and I just look crappy again. But if I do the mid load, then I can clean up and then just keep it the way I want it. It's almost like I'm babysitting a late front load to look the way I want on game day, if that's an easy way to describe it. I'll let Cliff describe the rapid backload, as that's kind of a specific way of backloading it a little more aggressively. But that's for all of those, I would say, to answer your question about specific timing on the day, we know from some other research on like carbohydrate loading and endurance sport, and actually intra-training, like during a race feeding, that like gastric emptying does a little better if you have more frequent meals, like every couple hours, that are moderate in size relative to having these large boluses, which tends to slow down gastric emptying. So in general, almost if you're trying to increase carbohydrates to a reasonably large amount, whether that's a mid, front, or backload, you probably want to do that like every 2 to 3 hours in these moderate boluses, with like kind of like your fat spread out, so it's not delaying any single one of these meals. And I think that's most important for two reasons. It doesn't actually change the way you look in aggregate. Like on like Wednesday, if you're doing the mid load, like it doesn't really matter. But if you want to see reliable data on what you actually look like when or your coach when you take pictures, then you want to follow that kind of process, so you kind of have a reliable look, and it's good data for your coach or yourself. And then on game day, it's especially important if you are still loading carbohydrate. And I have a controversial view about game day intake, but and I'll share that in a second. But that's when you could argue that the timing is more important, like on the Friday and Saturday, when it actually is about assimilation acutely. My thoughts on game day is that it's one of the least important days as far as what you actually do, at least in terms of carbohydrate intake. If you look at the time course of glycogen synthesis, assimilation, like if you loaded properly and then like on game day you just drank water and were mostly fasted, I don't think it would mess you up that much. And I've played with it myself, because that's just not, like, it takes a lot of time for glycogen to get there, especially with these shorter show formats where you get on stage at 1 p.m. and you're done with everything, and you've done the whole thing like midday. It could matter if like WNBF Worlds this year or last year, it was technically a 1-day event, but per the clock it was a 2-day event because they were getting off stage in the AMs. So yeah, so I mean, like if you have a really, really, really extended day, I could see an argument for it. But I would say that that's something to consider And that's also something I use as a coach to calm down my clients. Like, like if you had 60 grams of carbs right now, like 8 hours from now, that'll be fully assimilated, like maybe not that much, but it's the kind of thing where you don't need to worry about it too much. And it's also a red herring for people. Like, we've talked about how many people look better the day before, the day after their show. They go out and they have this huge meal, and they calculate the macros because they're insane. And they're like, I had 50 grams of fat in that meal and 230 grams of carbohydrates, and I already front loaded. Therefore, I need to have 100 grams of fat, and I need to have 900 grams of carbs in a 6-hour window, because that's what it took before I spilled over. And it's like, you have a fucking Congo line in your stomach of food, yeah. And only like a third of it has actually been assimilated in any way. So you have no idea that that's what you need. And you're seeing a really small window where you you're pre-spill, but you're not actually like perfectly peaked. So I think that's just something to consider, is that can be a red herring. And then I think I did my terminology justice before that.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it too. And, I agree. Like, I think it's good practice to have spaced out meals during peak week, just so you're not getting like wildly different looks from day to day digestion issues. You know what I mean? But like, as far as assimilation of nutrients, I think it becomes more important the closer to show day you get, but also the type of load. So like, if you are doing a heavy, like on a front load, I would say it's least important. Mid load, probably about the same. But if you're doing like a back load where carbohydrates are being loaded more towards the end of the week, I would say the more aggressive your back load or a rapid back load, then the more important the timing becomes, because then you need to be sure that all of your carbohydrates are assimilated by the time you hit the show day. I do a rapid backload. I'm going to put the disclaimer that I always do on the rapid backload is test it. The rapid backload, for those that don't know, is when I pretty much do the entire load in the day before the show day, maybe like 32 hours before you hit stage. With that, I would say it's most important on the rapid backload, because if you're trying to load, even sometimes like Eric said, it's not like these carbohydrates, are consumed and then digested and assimilated all the way to muscle glycogen in a quick time period. If you're taking in large amounts of food and you're doing it all at like 10 p.m. at night, but you hit stage at 8 a.m. the next morning, there's no guarantee that all of those carbohydrates will be stored in your muscle by that point. Even when I do like a rapid backload, more of it is done in the early portion of the day, and then there's a tapering as you go into the rest of the day. And I agree, show day, whatever peak week protocol I do, there's one consistency where I try to make sure that all of the loading is done before show day. Show day should ideally, you wake up show day, you're like, damn, I nailed it. We're maintaining from here on out. Like any carbohydrates I give somebody should be for the purpose of maintaining this look that we have, because we like this look. Just enough fats and, carbohydrates to maintain, just enough sodium to maintain. The only thing I would do, timing wise on show day is usually a bigger hit of sodium, maybe 1 to 2 hours before stage, to help you get a pump, increase blood volume. Sodium directly impacts blood volume, so you can get a bigger pump. So a bigger hit of sodium, maybe 1 to 2 hours before stage, and maybe some faster digesting carbohydrates, like some Gatorade or something, because everybody always wants that vascularity when they're on stage. And so, that's what leads people to get like drunk off of wine backstage. But I would say sodium will do the trick, and some glucose. We've all been there where we have our refeed day and we have our veins popping out. So, any substance floating through your bloodstream will help increase vascularity. So usually sodium and carbohydrates, just a few, will get that job done. I just don't think you need to do anything crazy in terms of meal timing. And then I would just say just avoid, we touched about, I would avoid vegetables on show day. You don't need massive amounts of protein on show day just for just for digestion purposes. So, I would say that's about it as far as timing goes.
Yeah, I think the only thing I really have to add to that is, if you're doing one of these really aggressive loads later in the week where you're putting down a lot of carbs Thursday, Friday, or Friday, and it's a large amount, in addition to spreading it out throughout the day, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but one thing I would try to do too is keep protein, fat, and fiber intake down that day. If you're going to put 1,000 grams of carbs down on Friday and you want to have time to digest, absorb, assimilate all of that, doing, small meals throughout the day, and then pulling your protein, fat, and fiber back, because all of those are going to slow digestion and absorption. And you're probably going to feel pretty miserable if you're putting down 1,000 grams of carbs a day and still trying to get a lot of protein, fat, and fiber, especially fiber and protein as well, because you'll feel really full.
Yeah. And, I think we've all been there too, where we see guys like they're going on stage in like 3 hours and we'll see them backstage just like pounding something like pasta or something like that. And I'm like, man, that's not going to make it. You know what I mean? Like it's not going to get there in time. It's like, I would say as far as timing goes, if you wake up and you are flat, like, one, I would say timing wise, also wake up early enough to maybe give yourself some time to affect some change on your look if some change needs to happen. But like if you are flat on show day, then you really should maybe reach for like liquid carbohydrates, something like a Gatorade or some dextrose or something like that, or even maybe even some rice cakes or something like that. But even you would still need to wake up pretty early to make that happen. And so I would say if you're trying to do a significant portion of your carving up on show day, you're too late probably.
Yeah. On that note, if you do see large acute changes in how you look, you can almost always be sure that was something related to electrolytes or water, which is essentially water. So like if a lot of the times when you hear those competitors who did the kind of traditional approach, what they did was they restricted water and sodium and ate a lot of carbohydrate, and they could only fill out so much in a weird, funky way. And they have a meal and they don't restrict their drinking and they look good really quick. You almost are sure that had probably not much to do with the carbohydrates of that meal, and that you were more dehydrated than you thought, or you too restricting electrolytes to fill out properly. So I think that's something to consider as well. And actually, this is something I meant to say earlier. So this is a little off topic, but Pete was talking about don't just sit around all day eating. I think you'd be surprised at how much your energy expenditure changes from having like a lazy day in the hotel and just sitting there. Like that could be 1,000 calorie difference in expenditure for a competitor. And obviously that just like signaling to get carbohydrate into muscle aside, all of that's 1,000 calorie difference in your energy expenditure. Like if you just simply don't need to load on as much carbohydrate if you're burning less, fuel in general. So this is an aside. That's another thing to keep constant.
No. Yeah, no. And I actually, a lot of times if my clients have step minimums, I'll keep a step minimum in while we're loading them. It may be something a little bit lower than a normal day, but nothing drastically lower, just to make sure they keep moving, especially if it's a situation where they're driving to the show all day or they're laying around in a hotel room all day. Like, yeah, to avoid that type of situation. Because like we talked about before, if you're testing out a peaking protocol, using a refeed and saying, oh, well, I'm going to test out double a refeed today at 2 weeks out when I'm ready early. If you're normally getting 10,000 steps a day, but then you lay around your hotel room when it's game day, the day before game day, and you're only getting 4,000 steps, that's a huge difference. And that's a variable absolutely that can, throw things off completely.
Yeah. And, kind of on that same note, Eric, you said something that we're jogging my memory with this, with like consistency, because like we said before, during peak week, like part of the battle is like diagnosing what is my current situation. Each day you're looking at yourself, like, what is my current situation? And I'm going to like throw out like a constant of like water. At least for myself, I tend to keep water. I find an appropriate level for this person and I just keep it steady across the week. Water is like the easiest variable that people still kind of mess it up. But like water, in my opinion, should be the easiest variable because you need enough for your body to function and store in the muscle and whatever it needs. But the excess will just be eliminated. And so I would say along those times, like also keep water constant throughout the day as much as you can. Like don't drink nothing for the first half of the day and then try to chug it, to make up for it because you fell behind. Like try to keep that pretty consistent. And just to like the water constant issue, because like, the terminology that Eric talked about, like people saying dry, and they still have this like fear of water, going into a show. And it's like, they think they're going to like selectively dehydrate, compartments, which is just not the way it works. So one analogy I always use is like your body, if you're drinking water, it's kind of like a tub with the drain open. Any excess will just run out through the drain. You're going to urinate the excess out as long as it stays consistent. If I start throwing sponges into that tub, which would, be the equivalent of like carbohydrates because the water is going to follow the solutes. So if I'm throwing sponges into that tub, the water will stick to it. And then the excess will run out the drain again. But if you throw too many sponges into that tub to where you've reached the top of it, then the water will start to spill out. The problem wasn't the water in the first place. It was just that you threw too many sponges in there. So I would tell people like keep your water intake sufficient and steady. I don't think that you should be like trying to manipulate water going down one day or the next or, anything like that, because I think that's when you're going to lead to differences in how you look from one day to the next, or even from one afternoon to evening if you got behind too far or something like that.
I think Eric's controversial comment became non-controversial as everyone agreed.
Everyone just agreed with me. Yeah, I think it's probably controversial among most competitors. Like, it's most important on game day. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's something I've seen spoken about a lot, and to my surprise, because when you look at the science of kind of glycogen loading, it's not something that's really manipulating things. And I think something on that day, you talked about kind of step counts and kind of energy expenditure and things. And on a game day, most people are sitting with their feet up. They basically are just maintaining that peak to look, hopefully, that they've already got. So I always think of game day as kind of a really kind of day to really do little, pump up, take some of your sodium, and that's where you release your kind of look as if it's like your workout or something that you're going to do that day. It's just like a normal day. Is there anything else? People talk about other things to take pre-stage. Is there anything else any of you have tried pre-stage? Any like pre-workout products? Maybe if the person's found like they take this one pre-workout and it just gives them a really good pump for that kind of their training, or are you just mostly using kind of Cliff, you talked about the 1 to 2 hours out, that sodium.
Hey, Pascal here. I just quickly wanted to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we put a huge emphasis on the personal aspect of our coaching. And if you want to take your physique and knowledge to the next level, hit the link in the description below.
For me.
Do you mind if I answer this first? Because I actually have to hop off this call. It's gone a little.
I was going to say.
Longer than I expected.
I was going to say, how long does everyone have? Because we haven't even touched on the training side, so we can always reschedule that. So I mean, we'll clock it after this. So feel free. Sorry, Eric.
No, it's all good. I lost track of time, and I've got a call after this. But if someone has specifically used a pre-workout that they consistently notice a better pump from, and I normally ask for a video on this. I'm like, prove it to me, then I'll do it. And if I don't always require that, especially if I don't think there's any reason it could mess things up, and they're really, really used to it, and they feel like it gives them a pump, then I'll be like, take it however timed you would for your normal workout. On that note of workouts, since we're there really quick, and since I'm going to jump off after this, unfortunately, I did notice that this last season, when I was training full body, my look in general was a lot more consistent. And I think it's because no specific body part got a ton of volume. So I wasn't dealing with a ton of muscle damage, that high frequency, and that constant, I'm speculating. This is not like I didn't do like freaking metabolic testing to know this to be the case. I didn't do any biopsies, but I would assume that both not a lot of water retention from muscle damage because no individual session blew me up. And then 2, because 5 days a week, these muscle groups are getting some training effect. And as we've noticed, or as we've mentioned in this roundtable, like staying active and getting a pump, like doing a little bit of a full body circuit, we think we're directing carbohydrate towards it. We're keeping the muscles insulin sensitive and ready to store carbohydrate. That might have been a part of it as well. This was the most consistent look I've had in the season. And that is probably the main thing that changed, I would say, was my training strategy. So that's something I've played with a bit, in that during peak week, the last couple of workouts become full body, and not just like pure pump up sessions, but like, let's reorganize your traditional normal volume, make it a little easier. It should be not a week where we're inducing a lot of muscle damage, but make it full body on, say, like Thursday, Friday. And I think that's a strategy that I have seen, at least anecdotally, work.
Awesome.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got to say goodbye now.
I think hopefully we'll reschedule another chat with everyone so we can touch more detail on training, and maybe we'll have some more questions to cover. So yeah, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
You got it, guys.
See you later, dude.
Have fun. Sorry, I got a dip. Good to see you all.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and follow up with that. I do tend to have people use whatever, because most people are using some version of caffeine, whether it be pre-workout, energy drink, or whatever it is that they are used to using. But I don't have them take a full dose, because adrenaline gets pretty high on show day. You don't want people so amped up they're like shaking out there, and that's I've seen it happen. So I'll tell them anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of their normal dose. And I'll have them do it. I mean, there's advantages, once again, from a slight diuretic perspective, with the caffeine and the stimulants. I also think that, so I think there's an advantage also from heating, like body heating. We're all a little bit cold backstage, like, it's cold back there. We're stripped down to nothing. So I think like there's an advantage for heating the body, helps you get a little bit of pump, a little bit better pump when you have some caffeine in you. And I try to have my clients get a little sweat going for one way or another, whether it be like staying warm or getting a pump, because I think most people would agree, once you break that first sweat, you know what I mean? Like you really open up the pores and get that, some of that subcutaneous water is coming out. Now it doesn't mean you want to like dehydrate yourself, but you get that little bit of sweat going and you sharpen up a little bit. I think if you're carved up properly, most people tend to look a little bit tighter as they get a better pump. They pose a little bit more and they get that little bit of sweat going. So I do have them use like some pre-workout, but once again, whatever they've been using, and maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of their normal dosage.
Yeah. I was going to say, one thing I have clients do oftentimes in addition to that too is, instead of like pumping so hard, because you'll see people backstage pump so hard they're like exhausted by the time they get out on stage. And so a lot of times I'll have them mix in just some good hard posing, like something that's not quite as exhausting as just going to town on pumping, and mix in a little bit of posing in between. And so they're not overly drained by the time they get on stage. But yeah, you want to get a decent pump backstage, especially if you've loaded really hard, to take advantage of that. But circling back to, Eric mentioned training. I think I don't necessarily have, I don't have clients do the full body splits necessarily like he does, on a regular basis. But one thing I think most people's peak week training has in common is that you're backing off intensity, probably maybe even volume a little bit, but you're backing off in the gym because you don't want to, the goal is to not cause muscle damage that last week. You don't want to have some blurring, some inflammation. You also don't want to be sore on show day so that you can pose hard. And so, in some way, shape, or form, I think it's common to back off, training, and it starts looking more deload like, especially late in the week, those last couple of days before the show.
Yeah, I think as well, we'll regather and we can go into some real depth on the training side as well, because I appreciate you guys already taking a good chunk of your day out of this, but it's been incredibly interesting hearing you all kind of go back and forth over everything.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, we've been doing this for like an hour and a half, and I still kind of feel like we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah. We haven't even talked about like super compensation or depletion loads versus just like loading off not depleted state or something like that.
Yeah, no, I it's funny because it is a subject that only takes, it may increase you 5 to 10%, but it is a very complex subject. I think when Pete and I were writing the book, I sent him the peaking chapter, and I was like, this thing's getting pretty long here. I was like, I almost feel like I need to cut it off at some point.
It's when you realize there's just so many variables, and especially because those variables change over time. So even like you test things, but I've had it even to the point of which peak week became a really like heat wave week. So I was like way hotter, sweating more, drinking more, like find myself getting thirsty. I was like, this is throwing another variable in the mix that I just didn't even think about. So I think it's why it's so helpful having even the baseline of knowledge that you guys are providing.
Well, this shouldn't be surprising. You and I spoke about progress photos for about an hour and 15 minutes. So I mean, this is easily a 9-hour subject, I would guess.
So I'll close the episode here at least and say, I definitely do recommend, if you've listened this far, you're that interested. If you haven't got the book that both these guys have written up all about bodybuilding and the peak week chapter, and that is particularly impressive, then definitely head over to there. But if people want to find out more about you both, or if you want to direct them anywhere, where should they head?
I mean, they can find me on Instagram, FitBodyPhysique, or my website's fitbodyphysique.com, or my email, fitbodyphysique@gmail.com.
And same thing, Instagram at CW Team Wilson, and then my website is teamwilsonbb.com. And like I said, they can find the book also quite a few places like Amazon and Walmart, and even my website too. So
awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all for listening, and look forward to a extended part 2 as well. Take care. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge, and I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.